All right, Mallory, thanks so much for doing this. My first question that I have for you is, just tell the audience, how you got started in mental health and kind of just like your journey.
Yeah, that's a big question. So, how did I get started in mental health? I originally went to school to be a social worker. I got my bachelor's of social work from Creighton University, and I did not know that I wanted to go specifically into mental health at that point. I just knew that I really enjoyed specifically working with underserved populations. Um, People who tend to not get access to services that they need, um, just really focusing on systemic change. Those were all things that were really important to me when I was getting my undergraduate degree in social work, and I knew I wanted to get my master's eventually. So I took a year off to do some volunteer work in Seattle, and then came back, got my master's degree in social work as well, and was given the opportunity to do a couple things related to mental health. The first year, I did an internship where I worked with middle school youth in back of the yard Chicago, and I did after school programming. So we really focused on social skills, we focused on mental health. Um, just really providing a group for a lot of youth at the schools throughout back of the yards, to have opportunities to connect with others, to really share what's going on in their lives, and then really provide them with resources to be able to cope with any struggles that they are facing. And then my second year of my master's degree, I was able to get an internship working in another part of Chicago, Englewood. Um, and I started doing mental health counseling. So I worked with mostly children, but it was all ages. I worked with a couple adults too, and did one-on-one therapy. I worked with families as well, and just kind of helping establish different ways to deal with, especially behavioral issues that the kids I was working with were facing. I worked with a few kids in foster care, and I went to a school in Englewood one day a week so that I could provide therapy from the school, specifically with the kids who are experiencing behavioral issues. So I think it was really through that internship that solidified my interest in mental health, and just I mean, how important it is to our everyday lives, right? And especially for people who are impacted by, systemic injustices, um, there isn't always there tends to be even less um, access to mental health services. So that's definitely something that I found was important, and I grew a passion for, and I really liked the one-on-one aspect of the therapy that I was providing. So I decided to continue doing that once I graduated, and now I'm doing that in a neighborhood called Andersonville, where I work predominantly with LGBTQ plus folks, but really anyone who's seeking services in the area. I still work with some adolescents, but mostly young adults too. I mean, all the way up to like 50 some year olds.
hmm And so tell me a little bit about the work that you do and your current role at Andersonville. Was that the name? Yeah.
Yeah, it's Andersonville Mindfulness and Psychology, is the name of the practice that I'm currently at. Um, so the work that I currently do is I like to kind of say, like, I provide like general mental health services, because at this point in my career I really am trying to figure out what I'm most interested in doing within the mental health field. But I have really enjoyed working with the LGBTQ population. I have really also enjoyed working with neurodivergent clients. Um, I have, a couple clients who are on the spectrum, and I haven't done any work one-on-one with people with autism before, so that's been really fun for me. Um, and I also have found I enjoy working with people with OCD. I just recently was trained in exposure response prevention therapy, and so I've been able to utilize that a lot more. But just generally speaking, I do a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of mindfulness. I mean, because really at the end of the day, in this bustling world, people need to just find ways to feel more grounded. So I really like to bring in mindfulness into my sessions.
Yeah, you were getting ahead of my next question, which is, what sorts of modalities do you use as a mental health professional?
Wow. Well, I can share a couple more that I didn't mention. I also do use ACT, acceptance commitment therapy. Um, I dabble in internal family systems or IFS. That's definitely something that is hard to get certified in, but there are trainings out there. So I've been trying to learn a little bit more about how to utilize internal family systems and just kind of helping people connect to their inner child, which I find really interesting. And there's a lot of really cool like meditations that I've been able to do around that with clients who are open to it. Um, and yeah, I mean, mindfulness-based CBT, um, like I mentioned, I think those are kind of the main modalities that I tend to use in my therapy. And it's kind of funny how depending on the client, you know, I'll kind of I'll kind of shift towards one that makes the most sense.
Hmm. Which one has been your favorite?
Mm, that's a great question. I love internal family systems, um, mostly because not everyone is open to exploring their inner child, like doing the inner child work. But when people are, it can be really fun to see what comes up. Um, in these meditations, I'll often ask people just to, imagine like what part of them might be coming up when we're talking about something difficult and they're feeling activated by that or triggered. And, I just am like, okay, so like, does this remind you of an aspect of your childhood? And I just kind of have them describe, like what they're seeing, what they might be feeling, and especially through the lens of this inner child. And it can be so powerful because some people, I mean, we just can feel so out of touch with our younger selves
Hmm.
sometimes. And I think for a lot of people that can feel really healing, but they also are very surprised by how many emotions come up when they are engaging in that exercise. So I really appreciate that. I think it's a really good way to just kind of take things to a deeper level with clients, especially when they're feeling ready to do that.
Hmm. What have you learned in doing this kind of work as a mental health professional?
Ooh, what have I learned? I think like first and foremost that I have a lot of my own stuff that I need to process. I think what happens when you're in this role is um you're constantly being triggered by other people's what they're sharing, right? The emotions that they're feeling. And that can be really difficult. And so I've really had to, I think this work has really forced me to look more within myself, and really figure out what am I feeling, right? I'm doing all this work to help other people recognize what they're feeling. And it it's it's hard to do that when I can't always get in touch with that myself. So I've really had to do a lot more work around making sure I can be in touch with myself and, any given moment. I mean, that's not realistic because, I'm a human too, but I think it's really forced me to do the work that I am encouraging my clients to do, which is important, right? Like, it's important that I'm not just telling my clients things that I would never try. Because I think, in order for me to, um, in order for me to give any sort of advice, right? Like it feels it would feel empty if that was something that I didn't have any understanding of or I didn't have any practice in.
Hmm. And what's one thing that is on your bucket list that you still want to learn and that you're like, I'm very curious to try something new or like find out about?
Ooh, I love that question. You have so many great questions.
Hmm.
I would say, ooh, okay, I don't know. I love learning. I think that's one thing that's really cool about this work is that I'm constantly learning things about myself, about my clients, about the world. Um, I think something that really interests me right now is somatic work. There's a lot that it's really easy to do like cognitive behavioral therapy because, people can share what they're thinking. People tend to be a lot more in touch with their thoughts and can, say them out loud. And we can kind of work through that and challenge certain unhelpful thoughts or beliefs. So that's always really good at the beginning of therapy. But I think it would be really interesting for me to learn a little bit more about how we can use more body, like somatic interventions, to really engage the body without always understanding what's going on in the body. It can be really hard to actually intervene in the way that's necessary. So, I mean, EMDR work would be really cool if I could do some more learning around that. That's something that not a lot of people understand, including, myself and a lot of therapists, but it's something that can be super effective with clients who have a lot of complex trauma. So I think that would be really interesting to learn more about.
Hmm. And I always ask a therapist this, what has been like your mentor that you sort of looked up to that said, "Hey, I want to go into mental health and be more
Mhm.
curious about." So is there like a mentor that you sort of look to that and say, "Hey, I want to be like
Yeah.
him," or "Hey, I want to be like her."
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's my own personal therapist. I was in the process of getting my master's when I first started seeing her. And her name's Rebecca Wise. And I didn't know I wanted to do therapy at the time as my career. And so it's been really cool to work with her um, for, a few years now and now get to the point where I'm like, oh, like I have always seen something in her that I really, see in myself or that I want to foster in myself. And now that I'm in, the same field, like it can be really, it's really cool to like utilize some of the things that she's doing in therapy with me and be able to use that with my clients.
Hmm. Um, like like the reason why I bring that up is because like for those who and this is my last question, for those
Okay.
who are thinking about entering the mental health field, what
Yeah.
advice would you sort of give to those, thinking about entering this challenging but complex field? Because correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, but like when you were going through learning how to become a mental health therapist, was it sort of like challenging or was it?
Yes. Yes, it was very challenging. And I think the way that you described the field, right, is challenging but complex. And I think that is something that is both like it both makes this job really hard, right? But it also makes me so excited to continue doing this work. This work, I mean, it's not for anyone. It's not for just anyone, right? But I think for people who have always kind of been someone who enjoys engaging in deeper conversations and really has a lot of compassion for people who are struggling, I think that it could be a really good field for you. And I think this field tends to attract a lot of people who have been through difficult experiences themselves, right? I mean, if you've heard of the wounded healer, like that is a
Mm-mm.
very common. So it's this idea that, you know, some of the best healers are the people who have gone through some really difficult experiences themselves because it's really hard to have, empathy for people if you haven't experienced, you know, difficulty yourself, if you haven't suffered yourself. So, and human suffering is something that everyone experiences at some point in their lives. But there can be really something beautiful about being in a position where, you're not, no one's perfect, right? But you have some lived experience that can really help in guiding clients, especially if you've, been through some of the things that they've been through, or you can at least relate to that, even if you can't connect to it completely. So I think, for people who are kind of wondering, like, well, I don't have my shit together, right? Like, how can I be in this field? Well, none of us do. I mean, we're all just humans trying to figure it out. But as long as you're someone who's willing to, you know, continue to learn about yourself and about um, your client and about new modalities or new ways of going about therapy, I think that's the most important part is just having that openness.
Uh-huh. Alrighty.